Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by a familiar face, Kyle Rowland of the Toledo Blade, as we get you ready for the upcoming Ohio State-Toledo game. You know, first and foremost, I've known Kyle for a long time. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know, Kyle and I worked together a couple of stops ago, and we always seem to keep bumping into one another. So it's funny how that all works out. Unfortunately, we won't have time for him to tell a bunch of stories from the past, but we'll get right into talking about the Toledo Rockets, a team that Kyle covers closely for the Blade. And just to get started, Toledo led the MAC in averaging 33 points a game last year and was really good in not giving up the ball. I know that this season, LIU, UMass, not really a tough schedule to start with, but how does this offense look in comparison to last year?
Hard to say so far. I mean, running the ball is definitely way different. I mean, Bryant Koback last year was the bell cow. He was the guy who was going to get a huge majority of the carries. He's now on the practice squad for the Vikings. And he was just a bully. I mean, he was going to gain yards. He was going to score touchdowns. They're doing a little by committee approach so far, the first two games. I think you'll see probably 3 or 4 different guys carry the ball on Saturday. It seems like Willie Shaw, a redshirt freshman, is kind of the guy who's going to emerge maybe as the best, get the most carries, I should say. Penny Boone is a transfer from Maryland who is pretty good. He's a big, stocky type of runner, not really like an every down type of back. They have Jaquez Stewart, who's, a hybrid guy who can catch balls out of the backfield and be elusive and shifty. And then they have Micah Kelly, who's a little similar, but was good in previous years, has not been great in the first 2 games. And then throwing the ball, DeQuan Finn, he's a fine passer. Needs to be a little more accurate. He's improved definitely a lot in that area. It's a little bit of like boom or bust. I mean, they'll either have like a huge passing play or things will, maybe go haywire here and there. But as you mentioned, not turning the ball over, I think that is a strength for Toledo. He's now started the last 9 games. I think he's got like 21 touchdown passes and 3 interceptions. So anytime you can obviously keep the ball away from the other defense is a big thing.
And talking about DeQuan Finn, the quarterback, I mean, you look at their stat page. I mean, he obviously is the quarterback. He leads the team in rushing at times, it appears. So does he have star potential, or is he, or is that a little bit overblown? And is he more of I don't want to say like a game manager, because a game manager, has, some negative connotations, but what are your thoughts on where, how good Finn could be? I mean, he's so far this year, 61% passer. I mean, he was sub 60 last season. I mean, just how good can he be?
He's got star potential in the MAC. I don't know how much he could be known nationally. He's a true dual threat quarterback. There's no doubt about that. He was actually Mr. Football in the state of Michigan, his senior year of high school. So he's obviously got pedigree. He's a really good player. Went to Martin Luther King High School there, which is one of the better Detroit high schools. And Penny Boone, the running back I mentioned, was actually his running back in high school. So they're back together now at Toledo. Last week against UMass, and I understand it's UMass, but they could not contain him at all running the ball. That was a huge thing for Toledo last Saturday. And they don't do a whole lot of designed runs for him necessarily. But the offensive line pass blocking is something that struggles and could be a huge issue against Ohio State. So, I mean, when he takes off and scrambles, I mean, he can get huge chunks of yards. The huge play that maybe some Ohio State fans remember last year, it was Finn who had I think it was 29-yard touchdown run against Notre Dame to take the lead late in the game. So he definitely can play well and play well against, highly ranked opponents.
Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Ohio State fans are very familiar with one defender on the team, Dallas Gantt. How's he been fitting into the defense? And, Toledo has done well in the portal, and are we talking too much about Dallas Gantt and maybe, overshadowing a player like Deshaun Holt who came over, because of our familiarity with Dallas Gantt?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's some of that. I mean, I don't think he's the best player on the defense, so I guess you could say, maybe they're talking a little too much about him because of his Ohio State background, but he's been a huge addition. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he was a leading tackler in the first 2 games. He has 20 total tackles. So his on-field impact is huge, but his off-field impact has also been something that's hit. I mean, regardless of how he played at Ohio State, or if he did or did not live up to his 4-star hype, he was still in that program for 4 years. He saw, what it takes to win at an elite level, whether that's getting your body right, how you prepare, all those types of things. And he's tried to bring that to Toledo. In the spring and summer, he kind of stayed in the background and didn't want to come in and beat his chest and say, I'm a guy who played at Ohio State. I know everything. And now he's become more vocal. He's definitely one of the biggest leaders on the team. For the Ohio State people that got to know Dallas, he's always been a really well-spoken, smart guy. And he's a very popular teammate in a few months already at Toledo. And he's definitely been a big part of that defense. But obviously there are more guys. Defense is where Toledo has kind of made its name recently, which is weird because they used to just be such an offensive juggernaut. Vince Karras, the defensive coordinator, came from Mount Union. And they've been a top 35 defense in both of his first 2 seasons. I think they'll be even better this year. Desjuan Johnson, defensive tackle, is going to be, maybe a 3rd or 4th round draft pick. He's got 4.5 tackles for loss already. He will have some success against Ohio State. I'm not saying it's going to happen for 4 quarters or anything like that, but he'll be an issue. Edge rusher Jamal Hines is really good. Judge Culpepper is another defensive lineman. He came from Penn State, and he's been a little like Dallas Gantt, where he's made a big impact in the 2 seasons now that he's been at Toledo. The secondary is very solid. RJ Delancey is a guy that they have who's good. They've got depth and talent on defense that I think can keep the game close for a half. I think 60 minutes is a stretch, but I don't really expect Toledo to embarrass themselves on Saturday.
Just to kind of dovetail off of that one, you talk about the strength on defense. Is Toledo better suited against the run or against the pass? Just for people who have not had a chance to watch them this season, just based on who they've played, where is their strength, or would you say that they truly are kind of a balanced defense?
Yeah, I think they're a balanced defense. Right now, it shortest shows that they're better against the pass, but the quarterback play of LIU and UMass was just not very good. But they're very good at clogging the running lanes. They're kind of, pass rush, I think, is really solid. I think that, there'll be some bad offensive drives by Ohio State on Saturday in the first half. I would be surprised if they just kind of do whatever they want. Although if Smith and Jigba and Julian Fleming play, that kind of changes the dynamic a little bit. But I would say that they're pretty balanced. And the thing that they have been good at is tackling. And that's incredibly important in a game like Saturday when they're going to be at a distinct disadvantage. You can't have a bunch of missed tackles.
I may not know a lot about Toledo based on LIU and UMass. You may have questions, but what kind of questions does Toledo have about itself, just based on having 2 games that are, again, not the greatest of opponents, and then having to go into, a very, what could be a lopsided, if you listen to the odds makers, a lopsided type of situation against Ohio State? What do they know about themselves at this point?
Yeah, I think they know that they're a really good defense, not necessarily because of the first 2 games, but because of that as well. They played well. Texas A&M and a bunch of teams on Saturday should have won by a lot, and they didn't. So they did take care of business. There's a little something said for that. But they just have the track record from last year and the year before on defense. So I don't think that's an issue. Everything is kind of focused on the offensive side. They need to have a little bit more game-breaking ability. Finn, as I mentioned, on offense needs to be a little more accurate. The pass protection, in particular on offensive line, has to be there. There's several things offensively they just have to get corrected. Certainly for Saturday, but more importantly for Toledo for the conference season in the MAC.
People around town, people around the program, what's the level of excitement of this game? I mean, I think around Columbus, people are like, well, everybody views the Ohio State game as their Super Bowl or whatever, but these teams haven't played since 2011. I mean, and that game was a 27-22 outcome at that point, but is there an excitement about it or I mean, how are people viewing this game?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely excitement. I mean, from the team itself, I mean, you get to play against the number 3 team in the country in Ohio Stadium at night. It's Toledo's first ever appearance on network television. They're very excited to, kind of prove that they aren't a 31-point underdog, I guess you could say. All these Ohio guys on the team, obviously it's a dream to get to play at Ohio State. Some of them want to prove that, hey, you should have recruited me. And then the city itself, I mean, Toledo's interesting and where it's located. Probably a 65-35 breakdown in Ohio State and Michigan versus Michigan fans. But all of those Ohio State and Michigan fans, their second favorite team is either Toledo or Bowling Green. And there's a ton of split Ohio State Toledo fans. So I think there's just a whole, lot of excitement from that standpoint that these two teams are finally playing each other again. And in the last 20 years, I mean, Toledo has a history of kind of rising up in these types of games. They've won at Penn State. They've won at Michigan. They've won at Arkansas. They beat Iowa State. As you mentioned, in 2011, they almost beat Ohio State last year. They probably should have beat Notre Dame. All those teams I mentioned weren't necessarily great in those particular years, but still, Toledo played very well and either won or should have won. So they kind of have that history of maybe not being such a pushover.
You said earlier, and once again, this is a Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm here with Kyle Rowland of the Toledo Blade. You said you think that this could be a really good game for 30, 60 might be a stretch, but Toledo wins this game if it does what?
Yeah, I mean, plays perfectly for one, I guess. If you think back to that 2011 game, I mean, Ohio State was 6-6, and it was just a lot of tumult that year. Toledo didn't actually even play that well in that game, which is kind of the shocking thing that they still almost won. Like, that will not be the case Saturday. Like, Toledo doesn't play well. It will not be close. Like 50-50 balls, like it all has to kind of go Toledo's way. If they have CJ Stroud, corralled in the backfield for a sack, you got to take him to the ground. You can't let him throw it away or get away. Third downs on defense are critical. Like, Ohio State can't be, 7 for 12 on third down. Like, Toledo's got to be able to get off the field. I think DeQuan Finn would almost need like 100 rushing yard type day. I think it would take Ohio State having issues, stopping him running the ball. He obviously would have to be accurate passing. There need to be turnovers. So, I mean, a whole lot has to happen for a 31-point underdog to hang in there for 60 minutes.
And final question, appreciate you being on the show. I'm going to ask you a final prediction. If you're not ready to give one, give us, a couple things to keep an eye on for this game. And if you want to give us a final prediction, do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking 49-21 Ohio State. I could see it being close for a first half, as I mentioned, but there's just so much firepower on Ohio State. I mean, it could be 14-7 late in the first half, and then it could be at the snap of a finger 28-7 at halftime. I mean, it just takes one play for these types of teams like Ohio State against a big underdog in Toledo to kind of get your footing and kind of correct things. I mean, I think Ohio State's the best team in the country, so it'll be a huge challenge. But the thing I am most interested in is how Toledo's defense plays against this offense. I mean, I think their defensive line, their front seven, like, I truly believe it'd be like the fifth best maybe in the Big Ten, which is pretty decent. I mean, they have a number of guys that are going to get drafted. There's no doubt about that. But Ohio State, even against a defense that good, can score kind of at will. So will be fascinating, kind of more interested in the first half than the second half, but we'll see what happens.
There you have it. So, and we'll have our predictions here on Buckeye Huddle here on Friday. But I want to thank Kyle Rowland for his time, and I want to thank everybody out there for taking some time and spending it here on the Big Me Kickoff. And until then, we'll talk to you soon.